Welcome to the video lecture for Unit 1, Module 1.2.2. Today we're going to be talking about the adrenal glands. Make sure that you guys pay attention to the learning objectives here. Remember, that's how I write both my quizzes and my tests for the lecture portion of the class. All right, let's jump into it. So the adrenal glands, which consist of a cortex and a medulla, cap the kidneys and secrete several hormones. So a yellow pyramid-shaped adrenal gland, or suprarenal gland, renal meaning kidneys and supra meaning above, sits on the superior border of each kidney. Each adrenal gland lies near the level of the 12th rib. A dense fibrous capsule firmly attaches each adrenal gland to the superior portion of each kidney. The adrenal gland on each side nestles among the kidney, the diaphragm, and the major arteries and veins that run along the posterior wall of the abdominopelvic cavity. The adrenal glands project into the peritoneal cavity, and their anterior surfaces are covered by a layer of parietal peritoneum. Like other endocrine glands, the adrenal glands are highly vascularized. A typical adrenal gland weighs about 5 grams or so, but its size can vary greatly as secretory demands change throughout the body. The adrenal gland has two parts with separate endocrine functions: a superficial adrenal cortex and an inner adrenal medulla. So let's talk a little bit about the adrenal cortex. The yellowish color of the adrenal cortex is due to the stored lipids that it contains, especially cholesterol and various fatty acids. The adrenal cortex produces more than 24 steroid hormones, and they're collectively called corticosteroids. In the bloodstream, these hormones are bound to transport proteins called transportins. Corticosteroids are vital. If the adrenal glands are destroyed or removed, the person will die unless corticosteroids are administered. Like other steroid hormones, corticosteroids exert their effects by turning on transcription of certain genes in the nuclei of their target cells and determining their transcription rates. The resulting change in the nature and concentration of enzymes in the cytoplasm affect cellular metabolism. Deep to the adrenal capsule are three distinct zones in the adrenal cortex. One, the outer zona glomerulosa; two, a middle zona fasciculata; and three, an inner zona reticularis. Each zone synthesizes specific steroid hormones. The zona glomerulosa is the outer region of the adrenal cortex. It produces mineralocorticoids, steroid hormones that affect the electrolyte composition of body fluids. Aldosterone is the main mineralocorticoid of the zona glomerulosa. The zona glomerulosa accounts for about 15% of the volume of the adrenal cortex. A glomerulus is a little ball, and as the term zona glomerulosa implies, the endocrine cells in this region form a small, dense knot or cluster. The zone extends from the capsule to the radiating cords of the deeper zona fasciculata. Aldosterone stimulates the conversion of sodium ions and the elimination of potassium ions. This hormone targets cells that regulate the ionic composition of excreted fluids. It causes the retention of sodium ions by the kidneys, sweat glands, salivary glands, and the pancreas, preventing sodium loss in urine, sweat, saliva, and digestive secretions. A loss of potassium accompanies this retention of sodium. As a secondary effect, the retention of sodium enhances the osmotic reabsorption of water by the kidneys, sweat glands, salivary glands, and the pancreas. The effect at the kidneys is most dramatic when normal levels of ADH are present. In addition, aldosterone increases the sensitivity of salt receptors in the taste buds of the tongue. As a result, a person's interest and consumption of salty food increases. Aldosterone secretion occurs in response to a drop in blood sodium content, blood volume or blood pressure, or a rise in potassium concentrations. Changes in either sodium or potassium concentration have a direct effect on the zona glomerulosa, but the secretory cells are most sensitive to changes in potassium levels. A rise in potassium levels is very effective in stimulating the release of aldosterone. Aldosterone release also occurs in response to angiotensin II, and we'll discuss that hormone later when we talk about the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. The zona fasciculata produces steroid hormones collectively known as glucocorticoids due to their effect on glucose metabolism. This zone begins at the inner border of the zona glomerulosa and extends towards the adrenal medulla. It contributes about 78% of the cortical volume. The endocrine cells are larger and contain more lipids than those of the zona glomerulosa, and the lipid droplets give the cytoplasm a pale, foamy appearance. The cells of the zona fasciculata form individual cords composed of stacks of cells. Adjacent cords are separated by flattened blood vessels, or sinusoids, with fenestrated walls. Stimulated by ACTH from the anterior lobe of the pituitary gland, the zona fasciculata secretes primary cortisol, also called hydrocortisone, along with smaller amounts of the related steroid, corticosteroid. The liver converts some of the circulating cortisol to cortisone, another active glucocorticoid. Negative feedback regulates glucocorticoid secretion. The glucocorticoids that are released have an inhibitory effect on the production of corticotropin releasing hormone, or CRH, in the hypothalamus, and on ACTH in the anterior pituitary lobe. Glucocorticoids speed up the rate of glucose synthesis and glycogen formation, especially in the liver. Adipose tissue responds by releasing fatty acids into the blood, and other tissues begin to break down fatty acids and proteins instead of glucose. This process is another example of glucose-sparing effect. Glucocorticoids also show anti-inflammatory effects. This is that they inhibit the activities of white blood cells and other components of the immune system. Steroid creams are commonly used to control irritating allergic reactions, such as the poison ivy rash, and injections of glucocorticoids may be used to control more severe allergic reactions. How do these treatments work? Basically, glucocorticoids slow down the migration of the phagocytotic cells into an injury site and cause phagocytotic cells already in the area to become less active. In addition, mast cells exposed to these steroids are less likely to release histamine and other chemicals that promote inflammation. As a result, swelling and further irritation are dramatically reduced. On the negative side, though, the rate of wound healing decreases, and the weakening of the region's defenses makes it more susceptible to infectious organisms. And for that reason, the topical steroids are used to treat superficial rashes that should never be applied to open wounds. The zona reticularis forms as a narrow band bordering each adrenal medulla. This zone accounts for only about 7% of the total volume of the adrenal cortex. The endocrine cells of the zona reticularis form a folded branching network, and fenestrated blood vessels wind among the cells. Under stimulation by ACTH, the zona reticularis normally produces small quantities of androgens, the sex hormones that are produced in large quantities by the testes in males. Once in the bloodstream, some of the androgens from the zona reticularis are converted to estrogens, which is the dominant sex hormone in females. Adrenal androgens stimulate the development of pubic hair in boys and girls before puberty. Adrenal androgens are not important in adult men, but in adult women, they promote muscle mass and blood cell formation, and the support of the sex drive. The boundary between the adrenal cortex and the adrenal medulla is irregular, and supporting the connective tissues and blood vessels are extensively interconnected. The adrenal medulla is pale gray or pink due in part to the many blood vessels in the area. It contains large rounded cells similar to cells in the sympathetic ganglia that are innervated by preganglionic sympathetic fibers. The sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system controls secretory activities of the adrenal medullae. The adrenal medulla contains two populations of secretory cells. One produces epinephrine, or adrenaline, and the other norepinephrine, or noradrenaline. We'll also abbreviate these to epi and norepi as we talk more throughout class. Evidence suggests that the two types of cells are distributed in different areas and that their secretory activities can be independently controlled. The secretions are packaged in vesicles that form dense clusters just inside plasma membranes. The hormones in these vesicles are continuously released at low levels by exocytosis. Sympathetic stimulation dramatically accelerates the rate of exocytosis and hormone release. Epinephrine makes up about 75 to 80% of the secretions from the adrenal medullae. The rest is norepi. These hormones interact with the alpha and beta receptors on plasma membranes, as we discussed back in 168. Stimulation of alpha 1 and beta 1 receptors, the most common types, speeds up the use of cellular energy and the mobilization of energy reserves. Activation of the adrenal medullae has the following effects. In skeletal muscles, epi and norepi trigger mobilization of glycogen reserves and accelerate the breakdown of glucose to provide ATP. This combination increases both muscular strength and endurance. In adipose tissue, stored fats are broken down into fatty acids, which are released into the bloodstream for other tissues to use for ATP production. In the liver, glycogen molecules are broken down. The resulting glucose molecules are released into the bloodstream, primarily for use by neural tissue, which cannot shift to a fatty acid metabolism, so they're not able to do that ketoacidosis. In the heart, the stimulation of beta 1 receptors triggers an increase in the rate and the force of cardiac muscle contraction. The metabolic changes that follow the release of catecholamines, such as epi and norepinephrine, reach their peak at about 30 seconds after adrenal stimulation, and they persist for several minutes. And as a result, the effects of stimulating the adrenal medulla often outlast the other signals of the sympathetic activation. So here's a chart that summarizes all the adrenal hormones. One thing that I want you to consider as we end on this module or this note is what effect would elevated cortisol levels have on blood glucose levels?